I never thought I'd find myself sleeping on a fold-out cot in my own garage at 68 years old, surrounded by garden tools and the musty scent of old tennis rackets. But that's exactly where Melissa, my daughter-in-law of just 8 months, had relegated me when I came to visit my son Taylor in Portland. "The guest room is being renovated," she explained with a thin smile that never reached her eyes. What she didn't know was that the elegant craftsman house they lived in, the one she'd been redecorating room by room without consulting me, had been in my family for 3 generations, and the property deed was still in my name. Sometimes the quietest people harbor the most surprising secrets. This is the story of how I reclaimed not just my home, but my voice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started with a phone call last April. I was tending to my community garden plot in Tucson, where I'd moved after my husband Richard passed away 5 years ago. The Arizona heat was just beginning to intensify, making the mornings the only bearable time to be outside. I was kneeling in the soil, planting heritage tomato seedlings, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Mom?" Taylor's voice had that particular tone he'd used since childhood when he wanted something but didn't want to ask directly. "How have you been?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just getting my summer vegetables in." "How are you and Melissa?" There was a slight pause. "We're good. Really good, actually. Listen, I was thinking, maybe it's time you came up to visit? You haven't seen the house since we moved in, and I know Portland in June is a lot more comfortable than Tucson." My heart leapt. It had been nearly a year since I'd seen my son in person. After he'd married Melissa in a small ceremony I barely participated in, the invitations to visit had dried up completely. Our weekly calls had dwindled to monthly, then occasionally. Each time, Taylor had an excuse about why the timing wasn't right for a visit. "I'd love that," I said, perhaps too eagerly. "I could help with the garden there. The property always had such beautiful rhododendrons and—" "Yeah, about that," he cut in. "Melissa's actually completely redesigned the landscaping. Very modern, very magazine-worthy." His voice shifted slightly. "Maybe just come and relax? No projects needed?" I should have recognized the warning sign. The house, my grandparents' house, where I'd spent summers as a child catching fireflies in the expansive backyard, where my father had built the gazebo, with his own hands, where I'd raised Taylor after his father died, was being transformed without a single nod to its history. "Of course," I said, swallowing my disappointment. "I'd just love to see you." We settled on a 2-week visit in June. I'd offered to stay at a hotel downtown, but Taylor insisted I stay with them. "We have plenty of room, Mom. It'll be fine." When I hung up, I sat back on my gardening stool and wondered why, after months of distance, Taylor suddenly wanted me to visit. Hope bloomed that perhaps he missed me, that whatever frost had formed between us after his whirlwind romance with Melissa might finally be thawing. I spent the next few weeks preparing for the trip, selecting small gifts for both of them. A handcrafted turquoise bracelet for Melissa from a local artisan, and a first-edition Hemingway I'd found in a second-hand bookshop for Taylor. I baked my signature pecan sandies that Taylor had loved since childhood, packaging them carefully for the flight. The Portland I flew into was draped in a light mist that softened the edges of the city. Taylor picked me up at the airport alone, explaining that Melissa was finalizing some things at the house. He seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly during the drive. "How's the teaching going?" I asked. Taylor had been an associate professor of American literature at Portland State for 6 years, following in my footsteps as an educator. "It's fine. Busy with committee work this semester." His responses were clipped, perfunctory. "And Melissa's interior design business? Is that taking off?" At this, Taylor brightened slightly. "She's doing incredible work. She just landed the Henderson account. They're tech moguls building a vacation home in Cannon Beach. and she's been featured in Northwest Home and Garden. That's wonderful, I said sincerely, though I couldn't help but notice how his entire demeanor changed when discussing his wife's accomplishments versus his own. As we pulled into the driveway of the Craftsman home, I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with shock. The warm, honey-colored exterior had been painted a stark charcoal gray. The front garden, once a riot of colorful perennials my grandmother had lovingly tended, was now a minimalist arrangement of architectural grasses and geometric concrete. Planters. Melissa thought the original color was a bit dated, Taylor explained, noticing my expression. The new landscaping is low maintenance. I nodded silently, remembering how my grandmother had always said gardens weren't meant to be low maintenance. They were a relationship between person and plant, requiring attention and care like any meaningful connection. Melissa greeted us at the door, perfectly coiffed in a cream-colored linen ensemble that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She air-kissed my cheek, leaving no trace of her red lipstick. "Patricia, welcome," she said, her smile professional rather than warm. "I hope your flight wasn't too tedious." "Not at all," I replied, handing her the small gift box with the turquoise bracelet. "I brought you a little something from Tucson." She accepted it with a murmured thanks but didn't open it. Instead, she turned to Taylor. "Honey, could you bring Patricia's bags in? I need to check on something in the kitchen." I stepped into the foyer and had to suppress a gasp. The interior had been completely transformed. The original oak wainscoting had been painted white. The built-in bookshelves where my father had displayed his collection of first editions were now sparsely decorated with abstract sculptures and monochromatic art books. The warm, inviting home of my memories had been converted into what looked like a showroom, beautiful but sterile, without a hint of the generations who had lived and loved within these walls. "Let me show you where you'll be staying," Taylor said, guiding me not toward the blue bedroom upstairs where he'd grown up, or even to the small guest room off the dining room, but toward the back door. "We've been doing some renovations," he explained as we stepped outside. "The guest room is currently being used as Melissa's home office, and the blue room is now our wellness studio." "Wellness studio?" I echoed. "Peloton, meditation area, that sort of thing," he said vaguely, leading me across the back patio to the detached garage. The structure had originally been built as a carriage house in the 1920s and converted to a garage by my father in the 1960s. Taylor pushed open the side door to reveal what could only be described as a hasty conversion. A fold-out cot had been set up in the corner. A small space heater hummed nearby. A card table held a lamp and a small vase of grocery store daisies. The concrete floor had been partially covered by an area rug that didn't quite fit the space. "I know it's not ideal," Taylor said, not meeting my eyes. "But it's just temporary until the renovations are done. There's a half bath over there." He gestured to a crude partition where a toilet and tiny sink had been installed. "Melissa thought you might actually appreciate the privacy." I stood silently, taking in what was clearly not a temporary arrangement but a deliberate distancing. The renovations excuse was transparent. The house had 3 bedrooms and 2 studies. There was no construction equipment visible anywhere. "It's fine," I said quietly, though it was anything but. "I've always been adaptable." Taylor seemed relieved by my acquiescence. "Great, let's get you settled, and then Melissa wants to show you what she's done with the place." As he turned to leave, my eye caught something familiar peeking out from behind some storage boxes. The corner of my father's mahogany roll-top desk, an antique that had been in the family for generations, was now relegated to garage storage, along with what appeared to be other original furnishings from the house. That evening, dinner was a tense affair. Melissa served an elaborate meal that accommodated none of my known preferences or dietary restrictions. The mild shellfish allergy I'd had my entire life, which Taylor was well aware of, was dismissed when I quietly mentioned I couldn't eat the shrimp appetizer. "Oh, I'm sure a little won't hurt," Melissa said lightly. This recipe is really the signature of Chef Monique in the Pearl District. Everyone simply raves about it. I picked at the salad instead, listening as Melissa dominated the conversation, with tales of her design clients and social connections. Taylor nodded appreciatively at each story, occasionally glancing at me as if checking whether I was suitably impressed by the life they'd built. "Patricia," Melissa said suddenly, setting down her wine glass. "Taylor and I have been meaning to discuss something with you." Taylor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Maybe not tonight, honey. Mom's just arrived." Melissa's smile tightened. "No time like the present. Actually, Patricia, we've been thinking it might be time for you to consider a retirement community." I blinked, my fork suspended midway to my mouth. "Excuse me?" "We've done some research," she continued smoothly. "There's an excellent facility in Scottsdale, all-inclusive, activities, medical care on site. Taylor and I would cover the entrance fee, of course." "I'm only 68, I said carefully. "I'm in excellent health, active in my community, and perfectly capable of living independently." Melissa's expression was one of practiced concern. "Of course you are now, but planning ahead is so important. And your little garden apartment in Tucson hardly seems sustainable long-term." I looked at Taylor, waiting for him to interject, to defend me, to acknowledge the absurdity of this ambush. He studied his plate instead. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, my voice steady despite the anger rising within me. "But I'm quite content with my current living situation." "Well, think about it," Melissa said, clearly unused to being refused. "The waiting lists for these places can be quite long." As I lay on the uncomfortable cot that night, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of the garage and shivering slightly, despite the space heater, I realized the true purpose of my invitation. They hadn't wanted to reconnect. They wanted to manage me, to tidy away the inconvenient mother to complete their perfect life tableau. What they didn't know, what I had never told Taylor because I wanted him to make his own way in the world, was that I still held the deed to the house. When my father passed, he left it to me outright. I had allowed Taylor and his first wife to live there rent-free years ago, maintaining the fiction that they were doing me a favor by taking care of the family property. After their divorce, Taylor had stayed, and I had never corrected his assumption that the house would automatically become his one day. Now, lying in the garage of my own home, surrounded by the discarded furnishings that told my family's story, I made a decision. It was time for some truths to come to light. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I woke at dawn from a fitful sleep, my back protesting against the thin mattress of the fold-out cot. Through the small, grime-covered window of the garage, I could see the maple tree my father had planted the year Taylor was born. Its leaves rustled in the early morning breeze, seemingly out of place in Melissa's austere new landscape design. After washing up in the cramped half-bath that barely deserved the name, I crept out of the garage and walked the perimeter of the property. The house looked almost unrecognizable in the soft morning light. The charcoal gray paint made it seem smaller somehow, more forbidding. The whimsical touches my grandmother had added, the stained glass transom windows, the hand-carved porch railings, remained, but now looked oddly incongruous with the sleek, modern aesthetic Melissa had imposed. The backyard had been similarly transformed. The vegetable garden where Taylor had helped me plant carrots and peas as a child had been replaced with a stark patio of geometric concrete pavers. My mother's beloved rose garden, with varieties she'd cultivated for decades, was gone entirely, replaced by sculptural grasses and black river rocks. It felt like walking through the physical manifestation of erasure, my family's history methodically removed, one plant, one color, one memory at a time. I found myself at the old oak tree, at the far corner of the yard. To my surprise, the wooden swing my husband had hung for Taylor's 5th birthday was still there. though the rope looked weathered and unsafe. I ran my fingers over the seat, finding the initials TM that Taylor had proudly carved himself, earning him a gentle scolding about respecting property even while I secretly admired his independence. "What are you doing out here so early?" I turned to find Melissa standing on the edge of the patio, wrapped in an expensive-looking silk robe, her expression a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. "Just getting some morning air," I replied mildly. "I've always been an early riser." She glanced at the swing with visible distaste. "We're having that removed next week. The landscaper says it's a liability." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the pang I felt. "Another piece of our history, scheduled for demolition. Coffee's ready if you want some," she said, not waiting for my response before turning back toward the house. In the kitchen, now all white marble and brushed brass fixtures, nothing like the warm cherry cabinets and butcher block counters my mother had installed, Taylor sat at the island scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I entered. "Morning, Mom. Sleep okay?" "Fine, thank you," I lied, pouring myself a cup from the elaborate coffee machine that looked like it belonged in a high-end cafe rather than a home kitchen. "Taylor and I have plans today," Melissa announced, setting down a plate that held nothing but half a grapefruit and what appeared to be a protein bar. "We have the Henderson consultation in Cannon Beach, and then dinner with the Whitmores." "The whole day?" Taylor asked, finally looking up from his phone. Melissa's smile was tight. "Yes, the whole day. We discussed this last week." "Right, of course," he mumbled, returning to his screen. I sipped my coffee, observing the dynamic between them. In the early months of their relationship, I'd noticed how Taylor seemed captivated by Melissa's confidence and ambition. Now, watching them in their home environment, I could see how that admiration had calcified into something more troubling, a deference that bordered on submission. "I'll be fine on my own," I assured them. "Perhaps I'll explore the neighborhood a bit." "Wonderful," Melissa replied breezily. "Just be sure to lock up if you go out. Oh, and the security system is rather sensitive. Taylor can show you how to disarm it before we leave." Her tone made it clear she was granting me permission to move about in my own house. A house where I had celebrated Christmases and birthdays, nursed Taylor through chickenpox and heartbreaks, and scattered a portion of my husband's ashes in the rose garden that no longer existed. After they left, I took the opportunity to truly examine what had become of my family home. I moved from room to room, cataloging the changes. The living room fireplace where we'd hung stockings every December still stood, but the mantel my grandfather had hand-carved had been replaced with a sleek marble slab. The kitchen nook where I'd taught Taylor to read was now a coffee station with no seating. The window seat in the upstairs landing where I'd spent countless hours reading was gone entirely, replaced by a built-in display case for what looked like expensive art pieces. It wasn't just the architectural details that had disappeared. There was no evidence of Taylor's childhood or our family history anywhere. No photographs, no heirlooms, no books passed down through generations. It was as if Melissa had orchestrated a complete exorcism of the past. In what had once been my father's study, now converted into Melissa's pristine home office, I noticed a stack of papers on the desk. Professional ethics kept me from examining them closely, but I couldn't help noticing the letterhead from Crestview Retirement Estates, the excellent facility Melissa had mentioned at dinner. My hands trembled slightly as I backed away from the desk. So it wasn't just talk. They were actively making arrangements, planning my future without my consent or input. I continued upstairs to what had been Taylor's childhood bedroom, the wellness studio now. The blue walls I'd painted with clouds, when he was 7, had been covered in a stark white. His bookshelves, the ones that had housed everything from Dr. Seuss to Dostoevsky as he grew, were gone. Instead, the room contained an expensive exercise bike, a yoga mat, and a meditation cushion arranged on a platform by the window. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Behind the door, partially hidden by a hanging plant, was a small, scuff mark on the baseboards. I knelt down to examine it, recognizing it immediately. It was where 8-year-old Taylor had crashed his remote control car, leaving a dent that we'd never bothered to repair, instead turning it into a joke. The Taylor crash site, we'd called it. In a house that had been scrubbed clean of personality and history, this tiny imperfection remained, overlooked in Melissa's ruthless renovation. I ran my finger over the mark, tears springing to my eyes for the first time since my arrival. This small dent in the baseboard felt like the last remaining evidence that my son had grown up in this house, that our life together had been real. What truly broke my heart wasn't the changed decor or the discarded furniture. It was realizing that Taylor had allowed, perhaps even participated in, this systematic erasure. Had our shared history meant so little to him? Had Melissa's influence been so complete that he no longer valued the roots that made him who he was? I made my way back downstairs, feeling like a ghost in what should have been my own home. In the dining room, I noticed that the built-in china cabinet had been painted over but still contained dishes. Curious, I opened it, half expecting to find some trendy, minimalist dinnerware. Instead, I gasped. There, arranged with perfect precision, was my mother's Wedgwood china collection. The delicate blue and white plates, cups, and serving pieces that had been used for every special occasion throughout my childhood were displayed like museum pieces, beautiful but untouched, decorative rather than functional. I carefully lifted one of the dinner plates, turning it over to see my mother's initials that had been painted on the bottom by the potter who had created the custom pieces as a wedding gift. These dishes were meant for family gatherings, for celebration and communion. Now they were props in Melissa's carefully curated design scheme, their history and purpose stripped away. As I returned the plate to its place, something else caught my attention. On the bottom shelf, pushed to the back, was a small wooden box I recognized immediately. It was my jewelry box, the one I thought I had packed when I moved to Tucson after Richard's death. Inside were pieces I had assumed lost in the move. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the silver locket with pictures of Taylor as a baby, and Richard on our wedding day, the charm bracelet my father had given me for my 16th birthday. With trembling hands, I opened the box and confirmed that these were indeed my belongings, items of significant monetary and immeasurable sentimental value. Items that should have been with me in Arizona, not hidden away in a china cabinet in Portland. The implications were disturbing. Either Taylor had deliberately kept these things from me, or Melissa had intercepted them during the move. Neither possibility spoke well of my son or his wife. I returned the jewelry box to its hiding place, my mind racing. This wasn't just about uncomfortable sleeping arrangements or insensitive renovation choices anymore. There was something more calculated at work here. A systematic effort to disconnect me from my possessions, my home, and ultimately my son, as I stood in the silent dining room, surrounded by the ghosts of family dinners past. I made a decision. I had come to Portland hoping to reconnect with Taylor, to understand his new life, perhaps even to form some kind of relationship with Melissa. Now I realized I needed to focus on something else entirely, reclaiming what was mine. Not just the house itself, but my dignity, my voice, and my place in my son's life. The garage that had been meant to humble me now became my war room. I had documentation to find, calls to make, and a strategy to develop. Patricia Mitchell, retired English teacher and supposedly irrelevant mother-in-law, was about to stage a quiet revolution. That evening, I heard Taylor and Melissa return around 11. Their voices drifted across the yard to my garage quarters. Melissa's, animated and dominant. Taylor's a lower murmur of agreement. I'd spent the afternoon making phone calls from a coffee shop 6 blocks away, careful to keep my voice down despite the ambient noise of espresso machines and indie folk music. My first call had been to Martin Atwood, my family's attorney since I was in my 20s. Now in his 70s, Martin had handled my parents' estate, my divorce from my first husband when Taylor was an infant, and later, all the legal aspects of Richard's passing. Patricia! What a pleasant surprise, he'd said warmly. How's the desert treating you? The desert is fine, Martin. I'm actually in Portland right now, visiting Taylor. Ah, at the old Mitchell place. How wonderful. Is it still as charming as ever? I'd hesitated, unsure how to explain the transformation of the beloved family home. It's different now. Martin, I'm calling because I need some documentation. Of course. What can I help you with? The deed to the house. And any other paperwork related to the property? I need copies as soon as possible. Martin's tone had shifted, becoming more professional. Is everything all right, Patricia? I'm not entirely sure, I'd admitted. I just need to clarify some things about ownership. Well, that's straightforward enough. The house is still in your name, of course. When your father left it to you, we set it up with clear title. We discussed transferring it to Taylor a few times over the years, but you always decided to wait. Yes, that's my understanding as well, but I think Taylor may be under a different impression. Martin had gone quiet for a moment. I see. And this visit to Portland? It's revealing some concerns? You could say that. I'll email you copies of everything, today. And Patricia, be careful. Property disputes, even within families, can escalate quickly. My second call had been to my closest friend in Tucson, Eleanor, a retired family law attorney who'd seen more than her share of intergenerational conflicts. They put you in the garage? She'd exclaimed, loud enough that several nearby coffee shop patrons had glanced my way. And they're shopping for retirement homes for you? Pat, this is elder abuse territory. It's not quite that dramatic, I'd said, though part of me wondered if she was right. But there's definitely something not right happening. I think Melissa has convinced Taylor that the house belongs to them entirely and that I'm inconvenient. Document everything, Eleanor had advised immediately. Take photos of your living situation. Keep a log of any conversations about the house or your living arrangements. And whatever you do, don't sign anything. Now, lying in the dark of the garage, I reviewed my mental checklist. Martin had emailed the property documents, which I'd reviewed at the coffee shop and then forwarded to my personal email for safekeeping. The deed was unambiguous. I was the sole owner of the house, had been since my father's death 20 years ago. Taylor had no legal claim. The question wasn't about legal ownership, but about approach. I could simply announce the truth and demand proper treatment. But that risked irreparably damaging my relationship with Taylor. If Melissa had been systematically turning him against me, a direct confrontation might only push him further away. I needed to understand exactly what Taylor believed about the house and my role in his life. Was he a willing participant in Melissa's schemes, or was he being manipulated as much as I was? Sleep eluded me as I contemplated my next steps. Around 2 a.m, I was startled by the sound of the side door opening. Taylor stood there, disheveled in pajama pants and a faded Portland State t-shirt. "Mom, you awake?" he whispered. I sat up, pulling my robe around my shoulders. "I am now." He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. "Sorry, I couldn't sleep." "Everything all right?" I asked, switching on the small lamp beside my cot. He sank down onto a stack of moving boxes. Boxes, I now realized, that contained more of my belongings that should have been shipped to Arizona. "Not really," he admitted, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that my heart constricted. "I feel bad about this." He gestured at the makeshift bedroom. "The garage accommodations?" I kept my tone neutral, not accusatory. "Yeah, it was Melissa's idea. She said the guest room really is being renovated, but—" He trailed off. "But it's not," I finished for him. He shook his head, looking miserable. She thinks having you in the main house would be too disruptive to her workflow. She needs her office space, and apparently having you upstairs would make her feel observed. I absorbed this, carefully choosing my next words. Taylor, can I ask you something? Who do you think owns this house? He looked surprised by the question. What do you mean? The property. The house itself. In whose name do you think it is? Well, it's the family house. Grandpa left it to you, and you let me live here after college. When Laura and I got married, you said we should think of it as ours. He paused, his brow furrowing. After the divorce, I stayed, and you moved to Tucson. I always assumed, you left it to me, right? Said I should take care of the family home? I nodded slowly. I did say you should take care of it. I never said I was giving it to you. His expression shifted, confusion turning to uncertainty. But all these years, I've been paying the property taxes, handling the maintenance. Have you? Or did I send you money for those expenses? I asked quietly. Taylor's face flushed as the truth dawned on him. The deposits, 4 times a year. I always thought those were just gifts. Help with expenses. They were exactly the amount needed for property taxes and an estimate for routine maintenance, I explained. Taylor, I never transferred ownership to you. I allowed you to live here rent-free, but the house is still in my name. He stood abruptly, pacing the small open area of the garage. Does Melissa know this? I doubt it. Based on how she's treating me, I assume she believes you own the house outright. He stopped pacing, his expression pained. Why didn't you ever tell me? I considered this question carefully. The truth was complex. Part of it was wanting him to feel established and independent. Part was never finding the right moment after he met Melissa. And part, I had to admit, was keeping this last bit of security for myself. I wanted you to make your own way, I said finally. To feel accomplished on your own terms, not because you inherited property. And after your father died, after watching how quickly security can disappear, I suppose I kept it as a safety net for both of us. Taylor was quiet for a long moment. So you could... He swallowed hard. You could actually make us leave? If you wanted to? The fear in his voice broke my heart. This was my son, my only child, suddenly realizing his foundation wasn't as solid as he'd believed. I would never do that, Taylor. This has always been your home, too. But legally, you could. Yes, I said simply. Legally, I could. He sat down heavily on the boxes again. Melissa's been making plans, big plans, renovations, landscaping. She wants to host a feature for that home magazine this fall. And she believes she has every right to do so because she thinks the house belongs to you, I concluded. Mom, I don't know what to do, he admitted, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. Melissa, she's very determined when she sets her mind to something. I've noticed, I said dryly. She's not a bad person, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. She's just very focused on creating the perfect life, the perfect image. Even if that means relegating your mother to the garage? He winced. I should have stood up to her about that. I'm sorry. His apology was a start, but it didn't address the larger issues at play. How he'd allowed himself to become subservient to Melissa's ambitions, how he'd participated in erasing our family history from the house, how he'd apparently stood by while my possessions were kept from me. Taylor, I said gently, why did you really invite me to visit? Was it your idea or Melissa's? He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Melissa thought it was time to discuss your future arrangements, the retirement community. I see. And what do you think about that plan? I didn't think it was necessary, he admitted. You're independent, active, but Melissa said we need to be practical, that we should make decisions while you're still capable. The implication stung, that at 68, I was on the verge of incompetence, needing their guidance and control. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about autonomy, respect, and the fundamental right to direct my own life. Taylor, I said, keeping my voice level despite the indignation rising within me. I think tomorrow we need to have a family meeting. All three of us. There are some truths that need to come to light. He looked alarmed. Mom, please. Melissa doesn't respond well to confrontation. This isn't about confrontation, I assured him, though privately I was prepared for exactly that. This is about clarity, and it's long overdue. As Taylor slipped back into the main house, I sat awake in the dim light of the garage, strategizing. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. I needed to be prepared for either outcome. Morning arrived with a steady Portland drizzle, the kind that beads on windows and turns the world a softer shade of gray. I'd slept poorly after Taylor's midnight visit, but woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. Today would change everything. I dressed carefully in the navy slacks and cream blouse I'd packed, adding my mother's silver brooch, a small act of armor donning that felt significant. I waited until I heard movement in the kitchen before leaving, my garage accommodations. Stepping inside the back door, I found Taylor alone, fussing with the elaborate coffee machine. His hair was uncombed, his expression tense. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice light. He startled slightly, then managed a strained smile. "Morning, Mom. Coffee?" "Please." I sat at the kitchen island, watching him fumble with the settings. "Where's Melissa?" "Still getting ready. She has a client meeting at 10. He hesitated. "About last night." I raised a hand to stop him. "Let's wait for Melissa. I think it's best if we discuss everything once, together." He nodded, sliding a mug of coffee toward me. "She won't be happy." "So I gather." We sat in uncomfortable silence until Melissa swept into the kitchen 20 minutes later, immaculately dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. She looked like someone heading to a corporate boardroom, not a residential design consultation. "Good morning, Patricia," she said with practiced politeness, barely glancing in my direction as she grabbed a travel mug. "I'm afraid I'm running a bit late. The Hendersons changed our meeting time." "Actually," I said calmly, "I was hoping we could all sit down for a few minutes. There's something important we need to discuss." Melissa checked her watch with exaggerated impatience. "Can it wait until this evening? I really can't be late for this client." "It can't, I'm afraid." I nodded, toward the dining table. "Shall we?" Taylor, looking increasingly uncomfortable, moved toward the table without waiting for Melissa's response. After a moment of visible annoyance, she followed, setting her bag down with a thud. "This had better be quick," she muttered. I took a seat, across from them, folding my hands on the table. "I want to discuss the house." Melissa's expression shifted from irritation to wariness. "What about it?" "There seems to be some confusion about ownership," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "Taylor and I had an interesting talk last night. It appears he's been under the impression that I gave him the house when I moved to Tucson." "Well, didn't you?" Melissa asked sharply. "Taylor's been maintaining it, paying the taxes. With money I send him quarterly," I interjected softly. "Specifically for that purpose." Melissa turned to Taylor, her eyes narrowing. "What is she talking about?" Taylor shifted in his seat. "Mom says the house is still in her name, legally hers." "That's ridiculous," Melissa scoffed. "You've lived here for what, 15 years? You've made improvements, handled all the expenses. It's adverse possession at this point." I smiled, genuinely impressed by her quick legal maneuvering. Adverse possession requires hostile occupation, using property against the owner's wishes. Taylor has been living here with my explicit permission. And as for improvements, those would be considered gifts absent any written agreement to the eye. Contrary. Melissa's cheeks flushed with anger. So what are you saying? That this isn't our house? That you could just evict us if you wanted to? Legally, yes, I acknowledged. But that's not my intention. I simply want to clarify the situation, especially in light of how I've been treated since arriving. How you've been treated? Melissa's voice rose. We invited you into our home. My home, I corrected gently. Which brings me to my next point. The guest room that's supposedly being renovated? I checked. There's no renovation happening. You deliberately put me in the garage because you didn't want me in the house. Taylor stared at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. Mom, And then there's the matter of my personal belongings, I continued, addressing them both. My jewelry box that somehow never made it to Tucson. The family heirlooms that have been relegated to storage in the garage. The systematic erasure of any evidence that this was once a family home with history and meaning. Melissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is absurd. Taylor, are you just going to sit there and let her accuse us like this? Taylor looked up finally, his expression torn. Melissa, I think we need to listen. No, what we need to do is call our attorney, she snapped. I've invested thousands in renovations, built my business reputation on this house. If your mother thinks she can just swoop in and take it all away, she's sorely mistaken. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of documents Martin had emailed me. These are copies of the deed, property tax records, and bank transfers. I've been making to Taylor for house expenses. I'm happy to have your attorney review them. Melissa snatched the folder, flipping through the papers with increasing agitation. Taylor watched her, a new wariness in his expression. This doesn't change anything, she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its certainty. We've been acting as owners. We have rights. You have the right to be treated fairly, I agreed. And I have the right to be treated with respect in my own property. Not relegated to the garage while you plan to ship me off to a retirement community without my consent. Taylor's head snapped up. How did you know about— I saw the paperwork in Melissa's office, I admitted, along with some rather concerning notes about my financial situation. You went through my things? Melissa's voice was incredulous. I went into rooms in my own house, I corrected. I observed documents that were left in plain sight. But, yes, I was curious why my son and his wife of less than a year suddenly invited me to visit after months of distance. Melissa threw the folder onto the table. This is a waste of time. I'm calling Bradley. She pulled out her phone and stepped into the hallway, already dialing. Taylor and I sat in silence for a moment. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above, a whisper. I didn't know about the retirement home research, not until recently. She said it was just preliminary information gathering. And the garage? I asked quietly. He winced. That was her idea. I should have said no. Yes, you should have, I agreed, not unkindly. Taylor, what's happened to you? You used to be so independent, so principled. Now you seem afraid to disagree with her about anything. He ran a hand through his hair, looking more lost than I'd seen him since he was a teenager. She's very decisive, confident. I admired that at first, but lately it's like everything has to be her way. The house, our social life, even my teaching schedule. And what about your mother? Where do I fit in this new life of yours? His eyes filled with tears. I don't know, Mom. I really don't. Things got so complicated so quickly. From the hallway, we could hear Melissa's increasingly agitated voice. No, Bradley. I need you to find a way around this. Yes, I understand what a deed means, but there must be something. Adverse possession, easement, something. I reached across the table and took Taylor's hand. I don't want to disrupt your life, but I won't be disrespected or manipulated. and I'm worried about what's happening to you in this relationship." Before he could respond, Melissa stormed back into the room. "Bradley says we need to see the original deed, not just copies. He wants us to come in this afternoon." She glared at me. "In the meantime, Patricia, I think it would be best if you found other accommodations. A hotel, perhaps." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me to leave my own house?" "It's not," she began, then stopped herself, visibly recalibrating. "It would be more comfortable for everyone given the tension." "Actually," I said, standing up slowly, "I think I will be more comfortable in the blue bedroom upstairs, the one my son grew up in, before it became a wellness studio." "That's not possible," Melissa said coldly. "That room is set up for my morning yoga and meditation. It's essential for my mental health and business focus." I turned to Taylor. "And what do you think?" He looked between us, caught in a tug-of-war that had been brewing since the day he'd met Melissa. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to please his wife warring with the dawning realization of how I'd been treated. "I think," he said slowly, "that my mother should not be sleeping in the garage of her own house." Melissa's expression hardened. "So you're taking her side? Just like that?" "It's not about sides," Taylor said, his voice gaining strength. "It's about what's right. Mom, you can have the blue room. I'll move your things up myself." Melissa grabbed her bag from the counter, her movements sharp with fury. "Fine. You two can sort this out. I have a career to maintain." She stormed towards the front door, pausing only to add, "Taylor, I expect you at Bradley's office at 3. Don't disappoint me again." The door slammed behind her with such force that a framed architectural print slipped from the wall and crashed to the floor, the glass splintering across the hardwood. Taylor stared at the broken frame for a moment, then let out a long breath. "That went about as well as I expected. Perhaps better," I offered. "You stood up for what was right." "Yeah," he said quietly, "for the first time in months." He looked up at me, his expression both pained and determined. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For all of this." "I know," I said, moving around the table to embrace my son. My real son, not the submissive shadow he'd become. "Now, shall we get my things out of the garage? Then perhaps we should have a longer talk about what happens next." As we walked out to retrieve my suitcase, the rain had stopped. A thin beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the old oak tree and the weathered swing that still hung from its lowest branch. Not everything had been transformed beyond recognition. Some things, the most important things, could be reclaimed. After moving my belongings to the blue bedroom upstairs, Taylor and I sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea, the silence between us both uncomfortable and necessary. The shell-shocked expression hadn't left his face since Melissa's dramatic exit. "When did things change?" I finally asked. "Between you and Melissa. When did it become this?" Taylor stared into his mug as if it might contain answers. "It was gradual." At first, her confidence was refreshing. She knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. After Laura left, his voice caught slightly at the mention of his ex-wife. After the divorce, I felt lost. Melissa seemed so certain about everything. "And when did certainty become control?" I pressed gently. He winced. "I'm not sure. Maybe when we moved in here together? She had all these ideas for the house, and they seemed exciting at first. A fresh start." He gestured at the stark white walls, the minimalist decor. "But then it wasn't just about paint colors or furniture. It was about erasing everything. Including me," I added quietly. Taylor nodded, shame evident in his expression. I kept telling myself it was just her style, her vision, that I was being supportive by going along with it. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. But it wasn't just style, was it? She was methodically removing anything that didn't fit her narrative. And what narrative was that? That this was her showcase, her achievement. He sighed heavily. That I was lucky she'd chosen me, and that my past, my family, was something to overcome, not embrace. I reached across the table and took his hand. Taylor, I need to ask you something important. Are you happy? The question hung in the air between us, simple yet devastating in its implications. Taylor's eyes filled with tears. I don't know anymore, he whispered. I thought I was. Or I thought I would be, once we achieved the perfect life she kept promising. The magazine features, the social connections, the professional respect. He trailed off, then added, but it never seems to be enough. There's always another renovation, another client, another step toward some ideal that keeps shifting. Before I could respond, Taylor's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, then set it face down on the table. Melissa? I asked. He nodded, reminding me about the meeting with Bradley. She's sent 4 messages since she left. Are you going to go? Taylor hesitated, clearly torn. I should, shouldn't I? She's my wife. Yes, she is, I acknowledged. But that doesn't mean you forfeit your right to independent thought or action. He picked up his phone again, reading the messages with a furrowed brow. She's upset, really upset. Says I'm betraying her by taking your side. Is that what you're doing? Taking sides? Taylor set the phone down again, more deliberately this time. No, I'm trying to do what's right. Finally. He rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking exhausted. Mom, there's something else you should know. About the retirement community paperwork. My stomach tightened. What about it? Melissa doesn't just want you in assisted living for your benefit. She wants... He paused, clearly struggling with the admission. She wants to be named on your accounts, for simplicity in managing your affairs, she said. A chill ran through me as the pieces fell into place. My accounts, including the proceeds from selling my Tucson property? And my pension? Taylor nodded miserably. She found out about Mom's inheritance too. The trust fund you've barely touched. She's been researching power of attorney requirements, conservatorship, laws. She has this whole plan laid out. The retirement community was just the first step. I felt momentarily lightheaded. This wasn't just about the house or my place in my son's life. This was a calculated financial strategy with me as the unwitting target. Taylor, I said carefully, how much does Melissa know about your financial situation, your actual income, and assets, not the lifestyle you present? He flushed. Not everything. My department chair position isn't as lucrative as she thinks, and I've had to take a home equity loan to cover some of the renovations she insisted on. A loan? On a house? You don't own? I asked, startled. The bank knows I've been living here for years. With your tax payments through me, it looked like... I never explicitly said... He couldn't finish the sentence. You implied ownership, I concluded, which means there's potentially fraudulent paperwork involved. Taylor paled. I never thought of it that way. I doubt the bank would see it any other way. I drummed my fingers on the table, thinking. How deep are you in financially? He hesitated, then stood and retrieved his laptop from the living room. Opening it, he pulled up a spreadsheet and turned it to face me. The numbers were worse than I'd imagined. A significant home equity loan, maxed out credit cards, personal loans with alarming interest rates. Melissa doesn't know about most of this, he admitted. Her design business is doing well, but the startup costs were enormous, and she has very specific standards for our lifestyle. I scanned the figures, my educator's brain automatically calculating totals. Taylor, this is over $200,000 in debt. How have you been making the payments? He looked away. I took a second position. Online teaching for a for-profit college. The hours are brutal, the pay is mediocre, but it's been keeping us afloat. Does Melissa know about this job? No. She thinks I'm working on a book in the evenings. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. She wouldn't approve of the association with a non-prestigious institution. I closed the laptop, processing this new information. My son, the brilliant, promising scholar I'd raised, was working a secret. Second job to maintain a facade for a woman who was actively plotting to gain control of my assets. We need to speak with a financial advisor, I said firmly, and probably an attorney who specializes in both family and financial law. Taylor's expression was pained. What about Melissa? The meeting with Bradley? Do you trust this Bradley? Is he your attorney, or hers? Hers. They knew each other before we met. I nodded, unsurprised. Then I think you should take a step back and consider your options before that meeting. This isn't just about the house anymore, Taylor. This is about your future, financially and personally. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. Taylor stared at it, his hand hovering indecisively. You don't have to answer, I said gently. If I don't, she'll just keep calling. Or worse, she'll show up here. Then answer. But remember who you are, Taylor. You're not just her husband. You're my son, a respected academic, a person with your own mind and values. He took a deep breath and accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Taylor, where are you? Melissa's voice was sharp, controlled. Bradley's expecting us in 40 minutes. I'm at home. With Mom? He replied, his voice steadier than I expected. Why? Haven't you been answering my texts? We need to present a united front to counter her claims. Her claims are valid, Melissa. The house is legally hers. All the documentation confirms it. There was a moment of tense silence before Melissa spoke again. Fine. We'll work with that reality. But we have leverage. We've improved the property, maintained it. We can negotiate a favorable settlement. Taylor caught my eye. Determination, hardening his features. We need to talk about more than the house, Melissa. We need to discuss the retirement community plans, the research into Mom's finances, the conservatorship documents I found in your desk drawer this morning. Another. Silence. This one longer and more ominous. You went through my desk? Melissa's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. After what Mom told me, yes. I needed to know the truth. The truth, she repeated coldly. The truth is that I've been trying to build us a future, Taylor. A secure, impressive future. While you've been… what? Teaching your classes and grading. Papers? Reminiscing about the good old days with Mommy? I could see Taylor flinch at the condescension in her tone, but he didn't back down. I've actually been working 2 jobs to pay for the lifestyle you insisted upon. The one we can't afford. What are you talking about? The genuine confusion in her voice confirmed Taylor's assertion that she'd been unaware of their financial reality. We're in debt, Melissa. Serious debt. The home equity loan, the credit cards, all to fund renovations and appearances we couldn't actually afford. That's ridiculous. We're doing fine. Your family home, your professor's salary, my business, my family home that isn't mine, Taylor interrupted. My professor's salary that barely covers our basic expenses, and your business that's still in its growth phase, with more going out than coming in. Melissa's breathing was audible through the phone. We're not having this conversation over the phone. I'm coming home now. And your mother better not be there when I arrive. She has every right to be here, Taylor said firmly. More right than either of us, legally speaking. Is that what this is about? Legal rights? Because I can fight too, Taylor. Don't think I can't. No one is fighting, Melissa, he replied, his voice softening slightly. We're just finally acknowledging the truth. All of it. Bradley is waiting, she snapped. Are you coming or not? Taylor looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I nodded encouragingly. No, he said simply. I'm not coming. I need to sort some things out here, with my mother. The call ended abruptly. Whether Taylor disconnected or Melissa hung up wasn't clear. He set the phone down on the table and exhaled shakily. "She'll be furious," he murmured. "Yes," I agreed. "But you did the right thing. The necessary thing." Taylor looked around the kitchen, at the cold, impersonal space it had become under Melissa's direction. "What happens now? With the house, with everything?" I considered the question carefully. The house was legally mine, but it had always been Taylor's home too. The financial entanglements would take time to unravel. And then there was Melissa, clearly not ready to relinquish her plans or her control. "First," I said, "we protect you, legally and financially. Then we figure out the rest. Together." He nodded, a mixture of relief and apprehension in his expression. "She'll be home soon, probably with Bradley in tow." "Then we have work to do," I said, standing up. "Starting with finding any other documents Melissa might have been keeping from you. Knowledge is power, Taylor, and it's time we reclaimed yours." Taylor and I worked quickly, methodically searching through Melissa's home office. The sleek white desk yielded several folders of concerning documents, printouts of my bank statements. How had she obtained those? Retirement account summaries, and detailed notes about power of attorney requirements in Oregon. Most disturbing was a half-completed petition for conservatorship, claiming I showed signs of declining cognitive function and financial mismanagement. "This is outrageous," I murmured, scanning the document. "I've never even had a conversation with her about my finances." Taylor looked stricken. "She told me you'd mentioned concerns about managing your money as you got older, that you'd asked for help." "I've never said anything of the sort." I set the petition aside, making sure to take photos with my phone. "Taylor, this goes beyond controlling behavior. This is a deliberate attempt to seize my assets." He nodded grimly, pulling open another drawer. "Here," he said, removing a thick folder labeled Mitchell Property. Inside were blueprints for extensive renovations. Not just cosmetic changes, but structural alterations that would have transformed the character of the historic craftsman completely. Attached was a contract with a construction company, dated for the following month, with Taylor's forged signature on the approval line. "She was planning to begin major construction without even discussing it with you?" I asked, stunned. "Apparently." Taylor's voice was hollow. He flipped through the plans, his expression darkening. "The estimated cost is over $300,000. We don't have that kind of money." "But I do," I said softly. "Between my savings, the money from selling the Tucson property, and the trust fund my mother left me, that would cover it easily. Especially if someone had power of attorney or conservatorship over my finances." The implications hung heavy. Between us, this wasn't a matter of a controlling daughter-in-law or family tension. This was a methodical plan to gain access to my assets under false pretenses. "We need to call Martin," I said, referring to my longtime attorney. "And I think you need legal representation of your own, separate from both Melissa and me." Taylor looked up, alarmed. "You think it's that serious? The forged signature on a construction contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars?" "Yes." "Taylor, I think it's that serious." Before he could respond, we heard the front door open and slam shut with such force that the windows rattled. Melissa's voice rang through the house, sharp and commanding. "Taylor? Where are you?" We exchanged glances. There was no time to return the documents to their places or pretend we hadn't been looking through her office. "Upstairs," Taylor called, his voice steadier than I expected. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and Melissa appeared in the doorway, her perfect composure noticeably fractured. Her hair had come loose from its chignon, and 2 spots of color burned high on her cheeks. Behind her stood a man in an expensive suit. Bradley, I presumed. Melissa took in the scene, Taylor and me surrounded by open folders from her desk. Documents spread across the surface, and her eyes narrowed dangerously. What do you think you're doing? She hissed. Finding the truth, Taylor replied, holding up the construction contract. Like this. When were you planning to tell me you'd forged my signature on a $300,000 renovation? Bradley stepped forward, professional concern on his face. Perhaps we should all take a moment to— Did you know about this? Taylor interrupted, addressing the attorney directly. About using my mother's money to fund renovations to a house that isn't even legally mine? Bradley glanced at Melissa, who maintained an icy silence. I was only recently brought into discussions about the property's ownership, Bradley said carefully. As for the renovation plans, I wasn't aware of the specific financial arrangements. Well, here they are, I said, handing him the conservatorship petition, along with plans to declare me incompetent and seize control of my assets. Is this the kind of case you typically handle, Mr. Bradley? The attorney scanned the document, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to concern. Mrs. Mitchell, I assure you I had no knowledge of this. My understanding was that we were addressing a straightforward property dispute. There is no dispute, I replied firmly. The house is mine, always has been. The only question now is how to address the unauthorized loan taken out against it and the attempted financial exploitation. Melissa laughed, a brittle sound with no humor in it. Financial exploitation? That's rich, coming from someone who let her son believe he owned a house for years, only to yank it away when it suited her. I never told Taylor he owned the house, I countered. I allowed him to live here rent-free while continuing to pay the property taxes. That's generosity, not deception. And what would you call this? Taylor asked, gesturing to the papers spread across the desk. The fake construction contract? The conservatorship petition? The retirement home brochures? Melissa's gaze hardened as she looked at her husband. I call it planning for our future, something you've proven incapable of doing. By stealing from my mother? By securing assets that should rightfully be part of our family, she snapped. Assets that would otherwise sit unused or be frittered away. I stepped forward, placing myself between them. Melissa, I think you should leave. Take some time to consider your position, because right now you're dangerously close to admitting to attempted elder fraud. Elder fraud? She scoffed. You're barely eligible for Social Security. The law doesn't define elder fraud by age alone, but by the attempt to deceive or exploit an older person for financial gain, I explained, my years as an educator evident in my tone. Which these documents suggest was exactly your intention. Bradley cleared his throat. Mrs. Jenkins, I think it would be advisable to continue this discussion after emotions have cooled. Perhaps we should— I'm not going anywhere, Melissa declared, folding her arms. This is my home. Actually, said a new voice from the doorway, legally speaking, it isn't. We all turned to see Martin Atwood standing there, his silver hair neat as always, his expression calm but determined. I'd called him before we began searching Melissa's office, explaining the situation and asking if he could come by. And you are? Melissa demanded. Martin Atwood, attorney for Patricia Mitchell. I've represented the Mitchell family for over 40 years. He stepped into the room, nodding respectfully to me before addressing Melissa directly. I received some concerning information this morning about potential financial impropriety involving my client's assets. Bradley extended his hand. Bradley Winters. I represent Mrs. Jenkins. Martin shook it briefly. I believe we've met at the Bar Association dinner last year. Look, I think we all recognize that this situation has escalated beyond a simple misunderstanding. Given the documentation I've been shown, he gestured to the papers on the desk. There are potentially serious legal issues at play. Melissa looked between the two attorneys, calculation evident in her expression. This is absurd. Everything I've done has been for our family's benefit, Taylor's and mine. By forging his signature? By planning to declare his mother incompetent? Martin asked mildly. You have no proof of any of that, she shot back. Actually, Taylor said quietly, I've been photographing everything and recording our conversations since yesterday. He held up his phone. Including your admission just now about securing assets that should rightfully be part of our family. Melissa's face paled. You've been recording me? Your own wife? I learned from the best, he replied, his voice sad, rather than triumphant. Isn't that how you got those recordings of my mother that you edited to make it sound like she was confused? The ones you plan to use for the conservatorship petition? I stared at Taylor in shock. What recordings? She had a voice-activated recorder in the guest bathroom, he explained. And she's been saving snippets of your phone conversations with me for months, editing them together to make you sound disoriented. Martin's expression grew grim. That would constitute illegal wiretapping in this state, among other serious offenses. Melissa turned to Bradley, desperation breaking through her composed exterior. This is all being blown out of proportion. They're twisting everything. Bradley looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Jenkins, if these allegations have merit, particularly regarding the forged contract and recorded phone calls, my ability to represent you effectively may be compromised. I think we should step outside and discuss your options. My options? She repeated incredulously. What about the house? The renovations? Everything I've worked for? Everything you've worked for, I echoed softly. Not everything we've built together or what's best for Taylor. Just what you've worked for. Melissa's gaze snapped to mine, fury and calculation warring in her expression. This isn't over. You think you've won, swooping in with your legal documents and maternal guilt trips? Taylor and I have a life here, a future. I hope you do, I said sincerely. But it needs to be built on honesty, not exploitation. Taylor stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Melissa, please go with Bradley. We all need time to think. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then, with a sharp nod, she turned and strode from the room, Bradley following close behind. We heard murmured conversation on the stairs, then the front door opening and closing, more softly this time. The three of us stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just occurred settling around us. Martin was the first to speak. Taylor, I've known you since you were in short pants, so I'll be blunt. You're in a precarious legal position. The home equity loan, the forged signatures, these could have serious consequences. Taylor nodded, looking exhausted. I know, I don't even know how to describe it. Blind? Complicit? Manipulated, I suggested gently. But that doesn't absolve you of responsibility. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He turned to Martin. What happens now? The attorney surveyed the documents scattered across the desk. First, we secure these materials as evidence. Then we contact the bank about the fraudulent loan. As for your marriage, he trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. That's for Taylor to decide, I said firmly. In his own time, without pressure from anyone. Martin nodded approvingly. Wise as always, Patricia. He began gathering the papers into his briefcase. I'll have my office prepare initial documentation to protect both your interests. In the meantime, I suggest changing the locks and security codes. As Martin continued outlining next steps, I watched my son, the bright, thoughtful boy I'd raised, now a man facing painful truths about his marriage and himself. The house had been saved, my assets protected, but at what cost to Taylor's heart? When Martin left to make some calls from his car, I joined Taylor by the window. He stood gazing, out at the garden, at the stark landscape Melissa had created. I keep thinking about the roses, he said softly. Mom's roses that Melissa had ripped out. She said they were old-fashioned, high maintenance, that everything needed to be sleek and modern. He turned to me, his eyes damp. But those roses survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, everything. They were hardy, beautiful, Real. I took his hand, feeling the slight tremble in his fingers. Some things can be replanted, Taylor. They have deep, resilient roots. He squeezed my hand gently. Thank you for coming to Portland, Mom. For seeing what I couldn't, or wouldn't. That's what mothers do, I replied simply. We see our children, even when they're hiding, especially from themselves. Outside, clouds were gathering again, the brief sunlight fading as another Portland rain prepared to wash over the city. But inside, despite the pain and challenges, ahead, something long-shadowed was finally emerging into the light. The hours after Melissa's departure passed in a blur of phone calls and documentation. Martin arranged for a locksmith to come that afternoon to change the locks and reset the security system. Taylor contacted his bank to flag the unauthorized home equity loan and met with a financial advisor Martin recommended. I called Eleanor, in Tucson, bringing her up to speed on everything that had transpired. You're handling this remarkably well, Eleanor commented after I'd explained the situation. If someone had tried to declare me incompetent and steal my assets, I'd be a raging mess. Oh, I'm angry, I assured her, sitting on the window seat, in the blue bedroom that was now properly mine again. But anger won't solve this. Clear thinking will. After finishing my call, I found Taylor in the kitchen, staring at his laptop screen. The familiar furrow between his brows, one he'd had since childhood whenever he concentrated deeply, was pronounced. What are you working on? I asked, putting on the kettle for tea. Damage control, he replied grimly. Checking our joint accounts, credit cards, everything. She's already withdrawn the maximum daily limit from our checking account. I wasn't surprised. Martin mentioned she might do that. It's why he suggested getting to the bank first thing tomorrow to separate your finances. Taylor nodded absently, still scrolling through statements. There's something else, he said after a moment. I've been going through emails. Did you know Melissa has been corresponding with a realtor about selling this house? There are messages dating back 3 months. My hands stilled on the teapot. Selling the house? But it's not hers to sell. She thought it was mine. Or rather, she thought she could convince me it should be sold. He turned the laptop so I could see the screen. Look at this exchange from April. I scanned the email thread between Melissa and someone named Diana Keller at Portland Luxury Realty. The messages discussed convincing the reluctant husband about the benefits of downsizing and capitalizing on the historic property market while it's hot. The realtor had provided an estimated sale price that made my breath catch, nearly double what the house had been worth when my father left it to me. She was planning to sell your childhood home out from under you, I murmured. Where was she? Planning for you to live? Taylor clicked to another email thread. Apparently, in a modern luxury condo in the Pearl District. She had viewings scheduled for next month. His voice was hollow. All while telling me the renovations here were to make this our forever home. I sat beside him, unsure what to say. The scope of Melissa's deception seemed to expand with each passing hour. What bothers me most, Taylor continued, closing the laptop, isn't even the lying. It's how thoroughly I failed to see who she really was, who I became when I was with her. Love can be blinding, I offered, especially when it's mixed with admiration. He shook his head. It wasn't just admiration. It was, I don't know, a kind of relief. After Laura left, I felt like a failure. Then Melissa came along. So confident, so certain about everything. It felt good to be chosen by someone like that. I thought about what he was saying, about the vulnerable state he'd been in when he met Melissa. His divorce from Laura had been amicable but painful. She'd wanted children. He hadn't felt ready. They'd parted as friends, but Taylor had carried the weight of that ending heavily. When did you first meet Melissa? I asked, realizing I'd never heard the full story. At a university fundraiser. She was there with clients. She'd designed their lake house, and they were major donors. He smiled faintly at the memory. She was so striking. Not just beautiful, but commanding. Everyone in the room seemed to orient around her. Including you? Especially me. He traced a pattern on the kitchen counter with his finger. She sought me out, said she'd read my article on Hemingway in The Atlantic, asked insightful questions, made me feel significant. The kettle whistled, and I rose to prepare our tea. And the whirlwind romance began? Taylor accepted the mug I offered. It wasn't even a whirlwind at first, more like a careful, deliberate courtship. Looking back, it was almost strategic. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? She asked very specific questions early on, about my family, my finances, my property. I thought she was just getting to know me, but now… He trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. You think she targeted you? Because of the house? He shrugged helplessly. I don't know what to think anymore. Were any of her feelings genuine? Was it all about assets and appearances from the beginning? Before I could respond, Taylor's phone rang. He checked the screen and grimaced. It's her mother. I raised an eyebrow. Melissa's mother? I didn't realize you were close. We're not. I've met her twice. Once at the wedding and once when she visited last Christmas. He hesitated, then answered the call on speaker. Hello, Vivian. Taylor, what on earth is going on? The voice was sharp, cultured, with the same commanding tone as Melissa's. My daughter just called me in tears, saying you've locked her out of her own home and are making wild accusations. Taylor met my eyes, his expression resigned. It's more complicated than that, Vivian. There have been some dishonest actions that needed to be addressed. Dishonest? The only dishonesty I see is how you've treated my daughter. After everything she's done to improve your life and that dreary old house. The dreary old house legally belongs to my mother, Taylor replied, his voice firmer than I expected. And as for improvements, those were planned without my knowledge, using forged documents and fraudulent loans. There was a moment of silence on the line then. I don't know what nonsense you're talking about, but Melissa is devastated. She's put her heart and soul into creating a suitable home, only to have your mother swoop in and stake some claim. Not some claim, I interjected, unable to remain silent. Legal ownership, which has never been in question. And who is this? Vivian demanded. Patricia Mitchell, Taylor's mother and the owner of the house your daughter has been redecorating without permission. Another silence, longer this time. When Vivian spoke again, her tone had changed. Mrs. Mitchell, I wasn't aware you were there. Clearly, I replied dryly. Just as I wasn't aware of the extent of your daughter's deception until today. Deception is a very serious accusation, Vivian said carefully. Yes, it is. As is elder fraud, which the conservatorship petition your daughter was preparing would constitute. I could almost hear the mental calculations happening on the other end of the line. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Melissa only wants what's best for everyone. What's best for Melissa, you mean? Taylor corrected. She was planning to sell this house without telling me, to have Patricia declared incompetent, to gain control of her assets. Taylor, you're obviously upset. We should discuss this when you're thinking more clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, he interrupted. And one thing is absolutely clear. Melissa needs to stay away from this house and from my mother. You can't just throw away a marriage over a property dispute, Vivian protested. This isn't about property, I said. This is about trust, honesty, and respect, all of which your daughter has demonstrated a concerning lack of. The line went quiet again. Then, Vivian's voice returned, noticeably cooler. I see you've made up your minds to paint Melissa as some kind of villain. Rest assured she will be protected from these slanderous accusations. Her father and I have connections throughout Portland's legal and business communities. As do I replied calmly. along with decades of documentation regarding this property and my financial affairs. But more importantly, we have evidence of your daughter's actions. Substantial evidence. We'll see how substantial it is when examined by our attorneys, Vivian snapped before ending the call. Taylor set the phone down slowly. Well, that went about as expected. She's protecting her daughter, I observed. That's what mothers do. Even when their daughters are wrong, I considered this. Especially then, sometimes. Though there's a difference between supporting your child through a mistake and enabling harmful behavior. Taylor rubbed his temples, fatigue evident in every line of his face. What do you think Melissa will do next? Based on that call? They'll pursue legal options first, looking for any vulnerability in our position. And when they don't find any, I sighed. Then it might get messy. Vivian mentioned their connections in Portland. They might try to apply pressure socially or professionally. Taylor nodded grimly. Melissa knows people at the university, board members, administrators. Are you worried about your position there? He thought for a moment. I have tenure, good student evaluations, a solid publication record. But academia can be political. All the more reason to document everything meticulously, I said. Martin is right about that. We were interrupted by the doorbell, the locksmith arriving to change the locks as promised. While Taylor worked with him, I wandered into the living room, looking more closely at what had become of my family home. Despite Melissa's austere redesign, traces of the original house remained. The built-in bookshelves, though now painted white and sparsely decorated, still had the slight unevenness my grandfather's hands had created. The fireplace mantel, while replaced, couldn't disguise the distinctive brick pattern beneath. Like the scuff mark in Taylor's old room, these elements of authenticity persisted beneath the surface transformation. I was examining a particularly beautiful original stained glass window when I noticed a thin folder tucked behind a decorative vase. Curious, I retrieved it and opened the cover, finding myself staring at what appeared to be background check results. On me. The report was comprehensive, detailing my financial accounts, property holdings, credit history, and even medical information. How had Melissa obtained this? Some of it could have come from documents in the house, but the medical information, the detailed banking data? This went far beyond casual snooping. Attached to the report was a handwritten note in unfamiliar handwriting. Results as requested. Same approach as the Williams case. Will require similar documentation. Cognitive decline. Call me. D. A. Chill ran through me. This wasn't just opportunistic exploitation. This was premeditated, possibly part of a pattern. Who was D? And what was the Williams case? I was still staring at the report when Taylor returned with the new house keys, the eye. Locks are done, he announced. What's that? I handed him the folder. I found this behind a vase. It seems your wife had me investigated quite thoroughly. Taylor's expression darkened as he flipped through the pages. This is invasion of privacy on a criminal level. How did she even get access to your medical records? That's what I was wondering. And who is D? The note makes it sound like this isn't the first time they've done something like this. Taylor froze, a look of recognition crossing his face. D could be Darren. Darren Moss. He's a private investigator Melissa knows through a client. She mentioned him once when we were discussing a potential tenant for her client's rental property. A private investigator with access to medical records and banking details? That doesn't sound entirely legitimate. No, Taylor agreed grimly. It doesn't. He studied the note again. The Williams case. That name sounds familiar. He went to his laptop and began searching through emails again. After several minutes, he looked up, his expression troubled. Eleanor Williams. She was a wealthy widow Melissa worked with about a year ago. I remember because Melissa was redesigning her entire estate. A massive project that would have established her in the high-end residential market. "What happened to Mrs. Williams?" I asked, already dreading the answer. According to this email thread, she was declared incompetent by her nephew, who then became her conservator and authorized the renovations Melissa had proposed. Taylor looked up at me, the implication clear. "The nephew's name is Bradley Winters. Melissa's attorney," I whispered, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about me or even about this house. This is a pattern, a scheme. Taylor nodded slowly. And I was just another unwitting participant, the clueless husband who could provide access to assets through family connections. The gravity of what we'd discovered settled over us like a physical weight. This wasn't merely a matter of family conflict or even individual fraud. This appeared to be a systematic operation targeting vulnerable individuals, particularly older women with significant assets. "We need to call Martin," I said, my educator's practicality taking over. "And possibly law enforcement. This goes beyond civil matters now." As Taylor reached for his phone, a text message appeared on the screen. From Melissa. "My attorney advised me not to contact you, but I want you to know this isn't personal. I truly care for you. When you calm down, you'll see this was all for our future, for our dream life together." Taylor stared at the message, then slowly set the phone down without responding. "Our dream," he murmured. "It was never our dream. It was always hers. And I almost let her steal yours in the process." I placed my hand over his. "But you didn't. When it mattered most, you saw the truth. That's what counts now." Outside, the rain had stopped again. Through the window, I could see the old oak tree and its weathered swing, somehow enduring despite Melissa's landscape redesign. Like the house itself, like my relationship with my son, it had weathered the storm. Changed, perhaps, but still standing. 3 months after the confrontation with Melissa, I sat on the restored back porch of my family home, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands against the early autumn chill. The garden was in transition, not yet returned to its former glory, but no longer the sterile expanse Melissa had created. Taylor had replanted some of his grandmother's heritage roses along the back fence, their late blooms adding splashes of color to the landscape. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly once Martin involved the district attorney's office. The evidence we'd gathered, the forged construction contract, the fraudulent loan application, the conservatorship petition, and most damningly, the connection to Eleanor Williams, had proven sufficient for a criminal investigation. Melissa, Bradley Winters, and the private investigator Darren Moss were now facing multiple charges related to elder fraud and financial exploitation. What had begun as a personal family drama had expanded into a case that made headlines in Portland's legal community. Eleanor Williams, it turned out, was only one of several victims. Our discovery had unraveled a sophisticated operation targeting asset-rich older women, particularly widows or those perceived to be without strong family support. The irony wasn't lost on me. Melissa had selected Taylor precisely because she believed his relationship with me was distant enough that he wouldn't interfere with her plans. Her entire scheme had hinged on the assumption that I was isolated and vulnerable, easily pushed aside into a retirement facility while she liquidated my assets. The sound of the back door opening interrupted my thoughts. Taylor emerged carrying his own mug, settling into the chair beside me. "Just got off the phone with Laura," he said, referring to his ex-wife. "She sends her best." I smiled. "How is she doing?" "Good. Really good, actually. She's expecting a baby in February, a little girl." "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "I always liked Laura." Taylor nodded, staring out at the garden. "Me too. We just wanted different things at different times." He took a sip of his coffee. "She's been incredibly supportive through all this. Even offered to testify about some concerning interactions she had with Melissa before our divorce." The divorce from Melissa was proceeding. though not without complications. Her parents had hired an aggressive attorney who was fighting to have the prenuptial agreement voided based on what they called Taylor's misrepresentation of assets. The irony of this claim, given Melissa's systematic deception, wasn't lost on anyone. "Any word on the house equity loan situation?" I asked. "The bank has agreed to void it completely, given the circumstances." The fraud division was particularly interested in the connection to the Williams case. Taylor looked relieved. One less financial mess to worry about. The past months had been challenging financially for Taylor. With the revelation of the extent of debt Melissa had accumulated in their short marriage, he'd faced some difficult choices. He'd sold his car, taken on additional teaching responsibilities for the summer session, and moved temporarily into the small apartment above the garage, the same structure where I'd been relegated to sleep, now renovated properly into a functional living space. I'd offered to help him financially, of course, but he'd been adamant about handling it himself. "I got myself into this mess by not paying attention," he'd insisted. "I need to get myself out of it the same way." His resilience made me proud, though I worried about the toll it was taking. The dark circles under his eyes had become a permanent feature, and he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. "The faculty meeting went well?" I asked, changing the subject. His expression brightened slightly. "Better than expected. The provost has been surprisingly supportive throughout this whole ordeal. Turns out Melissa's attempt to leverage her connections in the administration backfired spectacularly. Several board members were friends with Eleanor Williams. Justice takes unexpected forms sometimes," I observed. "Speaking of justice," Taylor said, setting down his mug, "Martin called while you were gardening this morning. The DA's office wants to know if you're willing to make a formal statement about everything that happened. They think it would strengthen the case against all three of them." I considered this. Throughout the investigation, I'd provided documentation and written statements, but had avoided more public involvement. Part of me had hoped to maintain some privacy in what was already a painful family situation, but if my testimony could help prevent others from becoming victims, "I'll do it," I said decisively. Though it won't be easy to discuss how thoroughly I was deceived, even briefly. Taylor squeezed my hand. "You weren't the only one deceived, Mom. I lived with her, married her, and I never saw what was happening until you pointed it out." "Love blinds us to many things," I said gently. "It wasn't just love," he admitted. "It was pride, vanity. I liked the life she painted for us. Successful, admired, perfect. I liked the man she made me feel I was becoming, even as I was losing myself entirely." The painful honesty in his voice made my heart ache. These past months had been a journey of self-discovery for Taylor, as much as they had been a legal battle. He'd had to confront not only Melissa's deception, but his own complicity in allowing himself to be molded into someone unrecognizable. "The dean asked me to lead the new ethics seminar series," he said after a while. "Starting next semester." "Taylor? That's wonderful." He gave a rueful smile. "Apparently, being the victim of a complex fraud scheme qualifies me as something of an ethics expert, or at least a cautionary tale." "Don't diminish this," I chided gently. "The dean recognizes your integrity and how you've handled a difficult situation. That's something to be proud of." He nodded, though doubt still lingered in his expression. "I've been thinking about the house," he said, changing the subject. "Your house." "Our house," I corrected. "It's always been as much yours as mine." "That's just it," he said, turning to face me directly. "I think we should formalize that. Not in the way Melissa wanted, but in a way that honors what this place has always meant to both of us." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "What are you suggesting?" "A family trust," he explained. "Martin helped me research it. We could place the house in a trust that protects it for both of us now and preserves it for the future. No one person would Own it outright. It would belong to the Mitchell family, with clear provisions for its use and care. The idea resonated with me immediately. This house had never been just a piece of property to me. It had been the repository of our family. History, the setting for Taylor's childhood, the last connection to my parents. Ensuring it remained protected from any future threats felt right. I think that's an excellent idea, I said warmly. Though I hope you're not suggesting this out of guilt. Not guilt, he said thoughtfully. Clarity. These past months have forced me to reevaluate everything. What matters, what doesn't, what's real, what's just appearance. He gestured at the house behind us. This place is real. Our family is real. Everything else is negotiable. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the trees. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant laughter of children playing somewhere down the block. "Will you stay in Portland?" Taylor asked eventually. After everything is settled, I mean. It was a question I'd been pondering myself. My quick visit had extended into months, and my small apartment in Tucson had been sublet to a colleague's daughter for the academic year. Portland held painful recent memories, but also the deep roots of my family history, and, most importantly, my son. "I think I will," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Not in this house. You should make it your home again, properly this time. But perhaps somewhere nearby?" Taylor's expression brightened. "There's actually a craftsman bungalow for sale 3 blocks over. Smaller than this place, but with good bones and a garden that needs some love. I noticed it on my morning run yesterday." I laughed softly. "Already house hunting for your mother? I'm perfectly capable of finding my own place, you know." "I know," he said, smiling. "But I've learned something important through all this. Family looks out for each other. Not by controlling or manipulating, but by supporting, by being present." He looked down briefly. "I missed a lot of years with you, Mom. Years when I was so focused on my own life that I let our relationship become secondary." "We both did," I acknowledged. "It's easy to take family for granted when things are going well." "Not anymore," he said firmly. "If there's one good thing to come from this whole mess, it's that I'll never again mistake control for care or appearance for substance." As if to underscore his words, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it, then showed me the screen. Another text from Melissa, one in a series of increasingly desperate attempts at contact since the criminal investigation had begun. "Please, Taylor," it read. "You have to believe me. Everything I did was for us, for our future. Don't throw away what we had over a misunderstanding." Taylor turned off the phone without responding and slipped it back into his pocket. "Some lessons come at a high price," he said quietly. I nodded, understanding completely. But when we learn, then well, they're worth it. The next morning dawned clear and bright. I woke early, as had become my habit, and made my way downstairs to start the coffee. Through the kitchen window, I noticed a small moving truck parked across the street and watched with mild curiosity as the driver approached our door. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find a delivery person with a clipboard. "Delivery for Patricia Mitchell?" Puzzled, I signed for the package and directed the movers to bring whatever it was to the back porch. To my astonishment, they began unloading the missing family furniture that had been relegated to the garage and then seemingly disappeared during Melissa's reign. My father's mahogany desk, my mother's reading chair, the antique side tables that had graced our living room for generations. Taylor appeared in the doorway, watching my reaction with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "How did you find these?" I asked, running my hand over the smooth wood of my father's desk, now polished to a warm glow. "Melissa had put them in storage across town," he explained, "under her business name. I found the receipt in her files while organizing the paperwork for the attorneys. Reclaimed them yesterday." The thoughtfulness of this gesture, recovering pieces of our family history I'd thought lost forever, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This wasn't just furniture. These were physical connections to our past, to the family members no longer with us. "There's one more thing," Taylor said, reaching into his pocket. He handed me a small velvet box that I recognized immediately, my jewelry box, the one I'd found hidden in the china cabinet. "I had everything cleaned and checked. It's all there." I opened the box to find my grandmother's pearl earrings, the silver locket with family photos, the charm bracelet from my father. These small treasures, these tangible connections to love given and received over decades. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing he understood the depth of feeling behind those inadequate words. Together, we arranged the recovered furniture on the porch and in the study, each piece finding its natural place as if the house itself had been waiting for their return. With each item restored, the sterile showcase Melissa had created receded further, replaced by the warm, lived-in family home it had always been meant to be. As we worked, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. What had begun, with the humiliation of being relegated to the garage, had led to the recovery of so much more than just legal ownership of a house. We had reclaimed our relationship, our family history, and perhaps most importantly, our authentic selves. Later that afternoon, as I prepared to leave for my meeting with the district attorney, I paused in the entryway. The house around me was transformed, not back to exactly what it had been before Melissa, but into something new, yet familiar. Modern elements remained alongside traditional ones, creating a space that honored the past while embracing the present. "Ready?" Taylor asked, car keys in hand. I nodded, taking one last look around. More than ready. As we stepped outside into the autumn sunshine, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead still held challenges: legal proceedings, financial recovery, emotional healing. But for the first time in a long while, I was facing those challenges on solid ground, with the foundation of family beneath my feet. The garage, visible from the driveway, stood as a reminder of where this journey had begun. But it no longer represented humiliation or rejection. Instead, it had become simply another part of the property, useful, integral, but no longer defining any of our stories. "You know," I said as Taylor opened the car door for me, "I never thought I'd be grateful for being forced to sleep in a garage." He laughed, surprise evident in his expression. "Grateful? Really?" "If Melissa hadn't been so determined to push me aside, to literally put me out of sight," I explained, "I might never have recognized what was happening until it was too late." Sometimes the most revealing moments come from the most humbling circumstances. As we drove away, I caught a final glimpse of the house in the side mirror. My house, Taylor's house, our family home. The place where I'd once been relegated to the garage until I revealed who really owned it. But now I understood that true ownership wasn't about legal deeds or property rights. It was about belonging, about history, about love that persists through challenges and changes. No one could take that from us, no matter where we slept or whose name was on the paperwork. Some things, once reclaimed, can never truly be lost again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the B mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.